Thanks very much, Chris, and good morning, everyone, and thank you for braving the difficult conditions to get here. I do think that what we're about to talk about today is going to need quite a lot of determination and perseverance over the next few years, so that you've shown the right character by making it here today. And I think with that, I've kind of got the confidence that this big challenge we've got ahead of us we're going to achieve together. I want to talk to you a bit about Biffa, but more importantly about the waste sector, what both the sector and all of you guys as the people involved in the management of waste has achieved, and we should celebrate that over the last couple of decades, but why things are at a critical point now and why we need some really serious government intervention and policy change, and when and if we get that, what we can achieve together. So pretty important stuff, and hopefully it'll set the scene. Some of the things I'm going to touch on will set the scene for some of the conversations that we'll be having during the course of today as we dive a little bit deeper into some of those things. So Biffa is a leading enabler of the UK's circular economy. If my predecessor 15 years ago would have said Biffa is the leading landfiller in the UK, that would have been both a fact but also something we would have been really proud of. In fact, Biffa was a listed company for about 2 years, about 15 years ago, before it became private. It then listed again, and I've got a copy of the annual report and the huge photographs of the landfill sites and the proud statistic of the fact that we'd landfill 8.5 million tonnes in that year, and the profit that we made from it. We didn't see in 2008 any shame or any problem in that. That was kind of what waste management companies did. And waste management as an industry really only evolved in the second half of the 20th century. Prior to that, essentially people burnt their rubbish in their hearths and scrap metal was picked up and what have you, and that was that. There was an industry was created in the second half of the 20th century, but it was organised around it primarily being a sanitary service to make cities and towns clean and not really worrying about where the rubbish went. And it was a linear model. It was an out of sight, out of mind model. And I was certainly grew up in that era and never really engaged in it or thought about it. Stuff went in the bin, and these magical bin men, and there were pretty much all men, took it away, out of sight, out of mind, and companies like Biffa built up a business and made money. Now we are a circular economy business, and what we do is focused around four key areas of investment and growth and profitability for us, and more importantly, services that you guys need. The first is, and somewhat, I guess, strangely for a waste management company, is we are in the business of reducing waste, and I think this sets us apart as a company. We have made as Chris mentioned, we made a meaningful strategic move 2 years ago to buy a business and integrate it into our offering, which helps you guys, some of you in particular, that are in the fast-moving consumer good industry and supply chain, to prevent waste. And what Company Shop is a industry solution. It is a business that's quite unique, that works and succeeds by being a solution for everybody in the sector, and helps make sure that, in particular food, but also other fast-moving household consumer goods that are surplus through the supply chain and that would otherwise go to waste, don't go to waste, and they find their way to people who need them, either on a commercial basis but at a deeply discounted price, or as part of a social enterprise, not-for-profit model. And we'll talk a lot more about that later, but it's something we're incredibly proud of. We think the impact it has environmentally is fantastic. We talk in our business in waste in tonnage terms. We're a tonnage business, millions of tonnes. Company Shop diverts about 40,000 tonnes of products from going to waste. 40,000 tonnes actually in the kind of waste space doesn't sound like much, but when you consider that that's 100 million individual products that you or I would happily consume and that can feed families, help stretch budgets go further, then it becomes so much more powerful. You'll hear a lot more about that, but we're really proud to have that as effectively the lead offer of what we have as a business. Now, I think we'd all agree we'd like to be in a world where everything can be, all waste can be reduced or repurposed or redistributed. We're a long, long, long way away from that. And therefore, it's incumbent on us as a business to provide the best possible services that give the right environmental outcomes, but are also easy to use and also save you guys money. You act on behalf of big local authorities with ever tighter budgets, or big corporations who are in very, very competitive markets, and every penny counts. So we lead off in the waste, when waste reduction or surplus management can go no further with recycling. And we are the leading recycler in the United Kingdom. We've in particular focused on plastics, which is by far the most problematic material that there is in the household or consumer space, and we've built over the last 15 years a leading business. It's based in the northeast of England, and it does what's called closed loop recycling. I call that real recycling. It's taking something that's been used, turning it back into a raw material so it can be made back into the same thing again. And we started off with plastic milk bottles, we've moved into PET, which is drinks and carbonated drinks and food trays as well. And by doing that, we're able to create that closed loop, that genuine circular model. We can avoid the need to export material with all of the risks that come with that and all of the loss of opportunity that comes with that. And we can make packaging more sustainable. However, we can't recycle everything at the moment, and try as much as we may, and therefore the next best thing is safe, secure, low-carbon energy generation from waste that can't be either redistributed and avoided being waste or recycled. And we are a leading investor in that space as well. The UK has been slow, in truth, to adapt to the opportunity, and has caught up now more or less with the rest of Western Europe. But in an age where energy security has become so much more front of mind for us, to know that we're generating about 4% of our electricity for the UK from the safe combustion of non-recyclable waste, and in therefore displacing the use of fossil fuels, I think is a good story. It's not as good a story as redistributing surplus or recycling waste, but it's a better story than that waste going to landfill, where that lost opportunity for resource recovery in the form of energy is lost. And finally, and last but by no means least, underpinning all of that is the unavoidable reality of the fact that waste gets created everywhere. Pretty much everything we do, be it in the household or wherever we go, whether it be to a hospital or a restaurant or a hotel or a park or a church, it doesn't matter. Pretty much everywhere we go, waste gets created, and it's the responsibility of all the people, of which you're a great representation, to make sure that the waste is collected in the most efficient, simple system that is user-friendly for you and your employees or your customers, but also causes a minimum amount of disruption to your neighbours and to the community at large, and has a minimum impact on the environment. And that is a core mission of Biffa, and it has been for many years. We're building the biggest, most efficient low-carbon collection system in the UK. It's roughly half and half between the big fleets that we operate on behalf of our municipal partners, doing household waste and recycling collection and street cleansing and other services for them, and the other half, roughly, is a national network that services pretty much everybody else, big commercial customers the length and breadth of the UK. And as I'll talk about later, and you'll hear more about, we are really driving the agenda to make that network zero carbon. We've got a long way to go, I'll be very honest with you, but we're making great strides. So that's who we are. Being no doubt about our determination, we've invested £600 million into those 4 areas in the last 4 years, and we've got plans to carry on investing. And we've made a huge transformation in our business. I talked earlier about the 8.5 million tonnes that we proudly sent to landfill 15 years ago. We're now down to under 2 million, and over half of that is waste that has to go to landfill because it's contaminated, non-compostable material. So that transformation has been huge, and we've been able to, through this investment, keep growing our business and creating shareholder value whilst adapting our services for you and other customers. if I just talk about the story so far for the sector, and I'm conscious I've touched on some of this already, but there's a lot to celebrate. The waste sector, and it shouldn't just be ourselves and our peers patting ourselves on the back, it should be all of us, all of the people involved in the waste system. We should all celebrate the success that we've had so far this century. And just to give you a couple of really good stats, one is at the turn of the century, 90% of household waste went to landfill. I know there's some pretty young looking faces here, but there's some that are kind of my age and maybe a couple even older. So, a lot of us will remember 2000. Can you believe that 90% of what we put in the bin then went to landfill? And it's back to my earlier point about a out of sight, out of mind business model. Whether it was a Coke can, baked bean can, a newspaper, whatever it was, it went in the bin and most of it went to landfill. Now, that's been flipped the other way around. Only 10% of household waste goes to landfill. 90% is either recycled or used for energy recovery. That is an enormous transformation, an enormous rewiring of the kind of waste system, which we've all been a part of. And because of that, not solely but because of that, but greatly assisted by that, waste has been a standout contributor to Britain's decarbonisation efforts today. So we've reduced the emissions from waste as a country by 70% in 20 years. Mainly because the reality of landfill is that when waste that's decomposable goes into it, it decomposes anaerobically, which means you get methane emissions that are horrific for the environment. And as well as you manage a site, you get what they call fugitive emissions. You get leakage, and that's why landfill is for that sort of waste is a disaster, and it needs to be eliminated across the world if we're going to achieve a net zero globe. So the UK is well ahead on this, and some of you may know we've just been taken private. We've got some American investors who are great pioneering investors, very committed to this space. But I've already seen some examples of other businesses in the US that they're starting to do things in the US that we did in this country 20 years ago. It's incredible how far behind some of these, on the face of it, developed societies are. So there's a lot to celebrate, but the reality is we've just hit the buffers recently. It's a classic low-hanging fruit situation, that the things that were quite easily recyclable have been, and therefore recycling levels effectively have stalled. Household recycling stats are far easier to come by because there's a whole system for reporting it, but we've been bumbling along in the mid-40% by weight now recycling for several years, and there's no prospects at the moment of things getting better. Not least because local authorities just don't have the financial capacity to implement more services, but also because the design of our packaging, the labelling of it, and the collection systems are all barriers to that. And we'll talk about this later on, but the reality is that our entire, whether it be the food system or the other packaging system, whilst it's improved, too much stuff is still not designed for easy recyclability. The labelling is still very unclear, which means that people who want to do the right thing often can't. And then the collection system is a real patchwork quilt, and in many parts of the UK isn't supportive of better recycling. But where we do manage to recycle or capture materials for recycling, be that from a household or from a business, we've got too much reliance on export, and the industry is guilty, including Biffa, is guilty of this, albeit we were only responding to unavoidable market forces. The reality is that for a couple of decades, most people who said they were recycling in the UK were actually just preparing for recycling. They were doing the collections and they were doing some sorting, but the actual job of the recycling was happening mainly in China or in other Southeast Asian economies. And without any governmental intervention to stimulate domestic recycling, it was hard because, and it's almost the same as what's happened to manufacturing generally across the Western world in the last 20 years. Lower costs in that part of the world, as well as lower environmental standards, meant that the only way companies like Biffa could be competitive was to export. I had a role in Biffa 10 years ago where I was responsible for part of our recycling business. I was selling 100,000 tonnes of waste paper to China. I was getting a price that was 20 or 30 pounds a tonne higher than I could get from the mills in the UK. I couldn't possibly have bidded for a local authority contract with a UK-based solution. I wouldn't have won it. So I hope you can forgive us for doing what we did, but it was just, that was the way the system was. And what we've all realised, I think, and I think some of the media has been really helpful in this, is that in doing so, we're creating huge environmental risks. None of us as members of society or as voters want our waste to be washing up on the shores in some developing country or left in the jungle or whatever. And also the fact that we're exporting not only the kind of, you know, the waste, but we're exporting resources. Once those, even if they are recycled, is there an opportunity for those resources to make their way back into the UK? And what about the jobs? So it just feels like an own goal on many fronts, really, for us. And I've mentioned this, the problem at the moment is that actually there's not that much incentive. Whilst we all want to do the right thing, there's not that much incentive to do much more. For businesses, a lot of the recycling that's being done today is being done because it saved money. Actually, to go further will probably cost businesses money. The same for local authorities. So we've got a real challenge on our hands. I've got a lot of sympathy for a lot of you guys to sit there, well, okay, I want to do more. You rightly put pressure on companies like Biffa and say, what more can you do? But quite often what we will say is, well, we can do X, Y, and Z, but it'll cost you more. So we've got a bit of a market failure issue going on when society all wants this, but we collectively are struggling to make it happen. And then on top of all of that, we really are risking now as a sector running out of steam on decarbonisation, because the big shift away from landfill more or less happened, and actually at the moment more collections to get better recycling or more recycling itself actually uses a lot of carbon. More vehicles, more forklift trucks, more loading shovels, more electricity consumed in recycling plants. So at the moment it's actually that huge success we've had as a sector actually is going to run out of steam as well. So it sounds a bit bleak, to be honest, and I think it's really, really important for companies like Biffa to say it as it is and to try and galvanise a bit of support and put pressure on government to do sensible things so that we can all move forward. And we do have a plan. We have a plan. We know what needs to be done. And I should say I'm actually quite encouraged that for the most part what government want to do are the right things. Two problems though. One is they announced a strategy 4.5 years ago. It was when Michael Gove was the Environment Minister in 2018, the big resources and waste strategy. 4.5 years later, nothing's happened. I say nothing's happened, a lot has happened, but nothing's actually been implemented. And in fairness, we've had Brexit, a pandemic and government chaos, and so we've lost a lot of time. That hopefully is now behind us, and hopefully politically what we've got is a Conservative Party that are desperate to show progress before the next election. And then you've got the prospect of Labour coming in, who are certainly not going to be pushing against this stuff. So I think actually you've probably got political consensus around wanting to do stuff now, and I think that's really encouraging. I do worry though that government have tried to bite off a bit more than they can chew, and some of the things they said originally would have been chaotic. Thankfully they've listened and they've rowed back on some of that stuff. We've tried to simplify it down into the things that we think really matter, and it's broadly these things. The first, and this is very important, is everything we do and the way we measure our performance, and you do well, is all on tonnage. It's about the stuff that goes over a weighbridge. How much have we recycled? How much has gone to energy from waste? How much has gone to landfill? And that's obvious, isn't it? We pick stuff up, we collect them, we have to weigh them. That makes sense. But the reality is we need a carbon-based system, not a tonnage-based system. Is it right that we, and in particular local authorities, are driving around a diesel truck to pick up garden waste? It's very heavy, is garden waste, isn't it? So it might be politically quite helpful to show a high level of recycling, when should we be actually spending that money to help stimulate more domestic composting and actually worrying about and then putting the money we've got left into doing some of the harder to recycle things that might not be so heavy but are problematic from a carbon perspective, such as flexible plastics. So there's some important changes need to be made, and within that there's an unavoidable reality that energy from waste will have to come into the scope of emissions trading. that's quite sobering. So if in round terms currently it costs about £100 a tonne, let's say, to put waste into an energy from waste facility, even at today's price of carbon, that would go up to £150, and it's probably more like £200 in a few years' time. And it's probably going to come towards the end of this decade, and it's going to be a huge deadweight cost, I'm afraid to say, for all of you, whether you be a business or a local authority. So it's a huge challenge. What we're saying to government is, you do need to do it, because the only way you stimulate change is to get that marginal cost of waste higher. It's a bit like smoking, make it so expensive people don't do it. But you can only do that when you've got the building blocks to enable the change to happen. And so I think what we're calling for is just some time for the rest of the things I'm going to talk about to come in. Driving more adoption of recycled plastics is really important. I think what we've shown in Biffa, and we'll talk about later, is some really great success. Plastic is in real risk of being demonised, and there's some awful examples of big brands abandoning plastics because they think that that's what their consumers want. But actually, as is always the case in life, it's more complicated than that. Plastics is actually, in many cases, the right material for packaging because it's lightweight, it's low carbon, it's durable, it's flexible, and it's recyclable. The main problem is make sure it's designed for recyclability and then have the systems there to enable it to be recycled. So that comes back to the points about better collections, things like deposit return schemes that we're going to be talking about later as well, to stimulate the right behaviour. And also, and to the government's credit, they've introduced a plastics tax, which effectively creates a financial penalty for the failure to recycle plastics or include recycled plastics in your packaging. That needs to be progressive. We saw this with landfill tax 15 years ago. Tell us that tax is going up. It's going up every year, but the percentage of plastics you've got to put in is going up every year, and we'll all respond. At the moment, what they've said is, you've got to do 30%, and then it just feels, we've dealt with that, now we can step back. We need to know that there's a progressive policy, and I think if we do, then it'll stimulate the redesign that we talked about. The other thing we need to do, and it's quite a technical point, and there's a lot of studies around this, but I think we really need to think carefully from a planning perspective around whether we actually need to give any more consents for energy from waste plants. The kind of build out that the UK has been doing, and we've been involved in it, it's nearing its end, and the last thing we want is to have too many of these, because we've underestimated the progress that can be made on waste reduction or recycling. Because if you have these things built and there's not enough waste, market forces will just drop the prices, and that will get in the way of more recycling. So it's better to almost have not quite enough than too many. And then we've got to deal with waste export, and I'm very frustrated that the government don't seem to want to grasp this, but I don't know who benefits, and I don't know what voter in particular would support continuing to export, in particular plastic. We at Biffa and others have proven that we've got the skills, the capital, the know-how to recycle our plastics here at home. Why allow this to continue? How many more panorama programmes do there have to be, which will damage us? You have a plastic bag in Malaysia and it says XYZ local authority, embarrassing for you guys, or it says the name of a big consumer brand. We don't want it and we don't need it. So I don't understand why government don't just take a really firm view on that. But again, give time to enable companies like Biffa to build the facilities that are needed. And then finally, last and again by no means least, we've got to get the collection systems right. There's a couple of things that are really important. We have to collect food waste separately, whether you're a business or a local authority acting on behalf of households. Food is an absolute nightmare because it contaminates other recyclable material. It's also a huge opportunity for green energy by creating biomethane, and also to create a really good soil enhancer, and soil is rightly getting more and more attention as a real problem. So we've got to get food out of the recycling, and we've got to stop burning food, because whilst we'll get some energy from it, let's be honest, it's not a great fuel, is it really? You'd better get it into an anaerobic digestion system. And the collection system, whilst I said earlier, we've done a good job so far with really pushing for the decarbonisation of collections, there's a bit of a harsh reality we need to face into. At the moment, it just costs too much, and the supply chain isn't there to enable us to roll out wholesale a zero emissions collection system. A diesel refuse vehicle costs about £200,000. An electric one costs between 400 and £500,000, and a hydrogen one costs about £1 million. So if you as customers say to us, I want a zero emissions collection system, first answer might be, I don't know whether I can do it for you because there aren't enough of these vehicles available. But the second answer will be, if I can do it, it's going to cost you. Do you want to pay for it? And all credit to some of the local authorities that have made that step. Even harder though for commercial businesses where you share the assets with many other customers. You know, we run effectively a milk round type business, and so there's a real difficult commercial situation there. And the only way I think this gets solved is by government mandating this, and it's got to start with city centres, and it may well be a local authority decision rather than a top-down decision. But if we can start to move the goalposts and to say these cities will only permit zero emissions vehicles, we will have to put the equipment in, and then we'll have to put the prices up accordingly for everybody operating in that city, whether it be a local authority or a commercial business. But by doing so, that will help stimulate the demand for these vehicles, and that will help bring the cost of them down. And we're seeing that with cars already. We will get there. These things will get cheaper, and the total cost of their ownership will come into parity. And at that point, we'll have a snowball effect. But it's going to need some government support. And if government can do all those things, and I know it's complicated, and I know it's there's a lot of interdependencies, but if government can do that, we and our competitors are ready to act. So firstly, we will invest to bring recycling home. You know, plastics I've talked a lot about. Great story around a defunct newsprint mill in North Wales. Newsprint obviously on massive decline, now owned by a Turkish business, being completely rebuilt for cardboard packaging. They want hundreds of thousands of tons of waste paper and cardboard from companies like us, and they're going to make cardboard in the UK. So recycling is coming home. People are there ready to do it, and that's a great story for all of us. But, you know, while ever you've got this ease to export and all these other problems, it will get in the way of that investment. Decarbonisation of collections, as I said, we will do it once the policies are there and the economic model works. And more importantly, because for us, we greatly value your business, and we believe we do a really good job of doing the basics really well, but where we really value our partnerships more than that is where we can do all of that for you, but we can also be a critical friend and an advisor as well, and so we can help you make the right decisions, whether that be in the way that you design the packaging that you put onto the market, or whether it be the way that you operate your services within your shops or your restaurants or whatever, and we can hopefully bring best practice and bring advice so that then you can make those right decisions. Because most of this is about that first moment. It's about getting those things right, and then the rest of it can flow from there. And then we'll design and deliver the solutions you need. We, you know, like I said, we spent 600 million quid in the last 4 years. We're here, we're ready. We've got ambitious owners. We're ambitious as a team to help do all of this for you. And also, it will save you money, or it will, at the very least, it will prevent you having to spend more. So it can happen, and we don't need to be too fearful of that. It just needs a government intervention to help stimulate a lot of this. And then, I say help you deliver. I think we will all then deliver waste net zero. We will make waste a non-issue for all of us, as we all have our plans around Scope 3 emissions, around delivering the net zero that we need, so that we're all doing our bit for the UK and for the overall system. So I hope that helps, and I hope it helps set the scene for some of the conversations we're going to have today. But you know, this is a really exciting time, I think, for our industry. We've achieved a lot. We should celebrate that. But goodness, we've got a lot ahead of us, and we're going to need some perseverance and some teamwork. So I thank all of you in advance for working with us on such an important mission. Thank you, everyone.